Hello, everyone. Welcome back to English in Advance. I'm Jessica, your host for today. If this is your first time listening, this is the place where we explore the English language not just as a set of rules to be memorized, but as a living, breathing part of our everyday lives. We believe that the best way to truly improve your listening and speaking skills is by immersing yourself in real-world conversations and stories. We share these experiences to help you practice in a way that feels completely natural and intuitive, allowing you to absorb new vocabulary, understand complex expressions, and ultimately start thinking more fluently in English. Today, I want to take you on a journey through some of my own recent experiences, a series of simple, everyday situations that turned into wonderful opportunities for learning. Let me begin with a story from just last week, something that happened quite unexpectedly. I was taking a leisurely stroll through a park in my neighborhood, one of those beautiful, crisp autumn afternoons when the leaves are just beginning to turn vibrant shades of red and gold. As I walked along the path, I saw an elderly gentleman who I later learned was named Mr. Harrison, struggling quite a bit. He was trying to lift a rather large, cumbersome cardboard box into the trunk of his car. He was clearly having a difficult time, his face etched with strain. I walked over and offered a hand, asking if he could use some help. He looked up, a wave of relief washing over his features, and gratefully accepted. As we carefully maneuvered the box into his car together, we started to chat. He told me he had just returned from a month-long trip to Japan, and the box was filled with souvenirs and gifts for his grandchildren. His eyes lit up as he began to describe his travels. He didn't just say Japan was beautiful. He painted a picture with his words. He spoke of the profound tranquility he felt while visiting the ancient temples in Kyoto, describing the serene atmosphere of the rock gardens. He used the word meticulous to describe the care with which the gardens were maintained, a word that perfectly captured the idea of extreme care and attention to detail. He talked about the bustling energy of Tokyo, describing the cityscape as a vibrant tapestry of lights and sounds. I learned so many wonderful descriptive words from that short conversation. He described the autumn foliage not just as colorful, but as a fiery cascade of crimson and amber leaves. Listening to him, I was reminded that learning vocabulary isn't just about memorizing lists of words. It's about understanding how those words can evoke feelings and create vivid images in the listener's mind. His rich descriptions of the subtle differences between the quiet, contemplative culture of the countryside and the dynamic pulse of the city were absolutely fascinating. Then, just a few days ago, my husband Leo and I decided to be a bit adventurous in the kitchen. We're both food lovers, but we tend to stick to the same familiar recipes. This time, we wanted to try making a classic French dish from scratch, coq au vin. We found a detailed recipe online, and as we began to cook, I had a realization. Following a recipe in English is a fantastic language lesson in itself. It's not just about knowing the names of the ingredients, like shallots or thyme. It's about understanding the specific actions required. For instance, the recipe instructed us to sauté the mushrooms until golden brown. Now, sautéing isn't the same as frying. It implies cooking something quickly in a small amount of fat over relatively high heat. Another instruction was to simmer the sauce gently. This phrase is so important. It doesn't just mean to heat the sauce. It means to keep it at a low, gentle bubble, just below the boiling point. This slow, gentle process is crucial for allowing the flavors to meld and develop into something rich and complex. Talking through the process with Leo really helped me focus on these precise cooking verbs. We discussed how to properly deglaze the pan with wine to lift all the flavorful bits from the bottom, how to reduce the sauce to intensify its flavor, and the importance of letting the finished dish rest for a few minutes before serving. It was a delicious meal, and a wonderful lesson in the power of precise, active language. My work life also provides constant opportunities for learning. Just yesterday, I had a long coffee meeting with my colleague, Marcus. He was telling me about a particularly challenging project he'd just completed. He was tasked with coordinating a marketing campaign across several different countries, each with its own cultural nuances and time zones. He talked about the difficulty of scheduling virtual meetings that were convenient for everyone, a problem I'm sure many of us can relate to. He mentioned the importance of managing stakeholder expectations. This is a fantastic business expression. It refers to the process of communicating with everyone involved in a project to ensure they have a realistic understanding of the goals, timelines, and potential outcomes. He also spoke about the need to allocate resources effectively, meaning how he had to distribute the budget and the team's time to the most critical tasks. Listening to him describe the project, I realized just how much professional English relies on these kinds of concise phrases. They're like a shorthand that allows colleagues to communicate complex ideas quickly and efficiently. Knowing expressions like mitigate risks, streamline the workflow, and deliver actionable insights can make your professional communication sound much more polished and confident. Later that same afternoon, I found myself with some free time and decided to visit a charming little bookstore tucked away on a quiet side street downtown. I love the smell of old books and the peaceful atmosphere of such places. While browsing the shelves, I couldn't help but overhear a conversation between a young woman and the shop owner, a wonderfully knowledgeable lady named Eleanor. The customer, whose name I believe was Sophie, was searching for a book in the fantasy genre, but wanted something different from the usual epic tales. Eleanor's passion for literature was immediately apparent. She began to describe different subgenres, using terms that were new to me. She spoke of low fantasy, where magical elements are placed in a realistic modern world, and urban fantasy, which often involves mythical creatures living secretly in our cities. She talked about the importance of a well-developed magic system in a fantasy novel, explaining that the rules of magic need to be consistent to be believable. I was captivated by the precision of her language. It was a great reminder that every hobby, every interest, has its own unique and specific vocabulary. I even joined the conversation, mentioning a historical fiction novel I had recently finished. It felt completely natural to use phrases I'd picked up from book reviews, like describing the gripping narrative, the well-researched historical details, and an unexpected plot twist that completely changed my perspective on the story. Another wonderful learning moment came during my morning walk a couple of days ago. I saw my neighbor, Mrs. Gable, tending to her beautiful garden. She has the most amazing roses, and I've always admired them. I stopped to compliment her, and we ended up having a lovely, long conversation about gardening. She explained the critical importance of soil composition, telling me how she amends her soil with compost to ensure it's rich in nutrients. We discussed the different sunlight requirements for various plants, with her pointing out which flowers thrive in direct sun and which prefer partial shade. Our chat was filled with specialized vocabulary that I rarely encounter. She talked about the best time to prune the rose bushes, to encourage new growth, the ideal fertilizer composition for promoting vibrant blooms, and the different stages of a plant's growth cycle. It occurred to me that even a seemingly simple topic like gardening has a rich and detailed language all its own. By listening carefully to Mrs. Gable, I could understand the meaning of these terms from the context of our conversation. It reinforced the idea that paying close attention when people speak about their passions is one of the best ways to expand your vocabulary organically. I also want to share a recent conversation I had with Leo about planning our next vacation. This is always a fun topic, but it's also a great way to practice negotiation and discussion skills in English. We were trying to decide between a relaxing beach holiday and an adventurous mountain trekking trip. As we talked, I noticed the specific kinds of phrases we were using. I found myself saying things like, "I really need a trip where I can completely unwind and disconnect from my daily routine." Leo, on the other hand, was excited by the idea of an active holiday, saying he wanted to explore the local culture and hike along scenic trails. Our discussion involved making suggestions like, how about we look for a place that offers a bit of both? It involved comparing options, using expressions like, the beach resort is probably more cost-effective, but the mountain retreat offers a more unique experience. Planning something together in English is a fantastic exercise. It forces you to phrase questions clearly, present your opinions persuasively, and work towards a compromise, all of which are essential skills for natural, fluent conversation. Finally, I want to tell you about a small but meaningful experience from a local community event I participated in last weekend. I volunteered to help organize a charity food drive for a local shelter. Working with a team of other volunteers required a lot of communication and coordination. I found myself using and hearing phrases related to logistics and teamwork all day long. We talked about team collaboration to ensure everyone knew their roles. We discussed the event logistics, which included everything from setting up collection bins to arranging transportation for the donated food. We also focused on participant engagement, thinking of ways to encourage more people in the community to donate. Listening and responding in a busy, active environment like that is an incredible learning experience. You don't have time to stop and translate in your head. You have to understand and reply in the natural flow of the conversation. It teaches you not only new words, but also the rhythm and pace of real-world English. Across all of these varied experiences, from helping a neighbor to planning a trip, a clear pattern emerged for me. Our daily lives are absolutely filled with opportunities to learn and practice English. The key is to shift your mindset from being a passive listener to an active one. It's about paying conscious attention to the specific words, the unique expressions, and the interesting phrases that people use around you. And then, the most important step is to try using them yourself. Don't be afraid to experiment with new vocabulary in your own conversations. That is how language truly becomes a part of you. Just a few days ago, another one of these learning moments happened when I was taking out the recycling bins. I ran into my neighbor, Ben, who lives a few doors down. He looked incredibly excited about something, so I asked him what was new. His face lit up and he told me he had just started taking guitar lessons. I asked him how he was finding the experience, and he launched into a detailed explanation of the challenges. He talked about the difficulty of finger positioning to form the chords correctly, the struggle to maintain a steady strumming pattern, and the awkwardness of chord transitions, moving smoothly from one chord to another. Listening to him describe his new hobby, I was struck by how every new skill we learn, whether it's a musical instrument or a new language, comes with its own very specific terminology. He even took out his phone to show me a video of a simple melody he'd learned. We then had a short discussion about the nature of practice itself. We used phrases like the importance of a daily routine, celebrating incremental progress, those small steps forward, and the concept of muscle memory, where your fingers eventually learn to move to the right places without conscious thought. It was a wonderful parallel to the process of learning English. Later that same evening, I got a phone call from my cousin Amelia. She's an avid hiker and had just returned from a long weekend trip in the mountains. She was calling to tell me all about it. Her storytelling was so vivid, and I paid close attention to the way she used language to bring her experience to life. She described the narrow trails that wound along the edge of a cliff, the steep inclines that left her breathless, and the breathtaking vistas that opened up at the summit. What I found particularly interesting was how she naturally wove in descriptive phrases to convey her feelings and actions. She would say things like, "I had to stop for a moment to catch my breath," or "I just stood there for a few minutes taking in the scenery." When she reached the peak, she described feeling completely accomplished. It was a great lesson in how effective storytelling in English often relies on dynamic action words and evocative phrases. She wasn't just listing facts about her hike. She was making me feel like I was right there with her. The next morning, I had to run to the supermarket to pick up a few things for dinner. The store was quite busy, and I ended up waiting in the checkout line for a little while. The man in front of me, whose name was David, struck up a conversation about the different types of coffee beans on display near the counter. It turned out he was a real coffee enthusiast. We started talking about brew strength, aroma profiles, and the superior taste of freshly ground beans. It was another perfect example of how even the most casual, everyday conversations can become rich with specialized vocabulary when people are passionate about a topic. We discussed our personal preferences using phrases that I mentally noted for future use. He said, "I personally prefer bold, robust flavors," while I mentioned that a light roast usually suits me better. We even talked about the best grind size for different brewing methods, like a medium grind for a drip coffee maker. It was a simple, friendly exchange, but it was packed with useful, specific language. One sunny afternoon, I accompanied Leo to a local farmer's market. We love going there on weekends to get fresh produce. As we wandered from stall to stall, Leo, who knows a lot about healthy eating, was explaining the benefits of buying local. He pointed out the difference between organic produce and conventionally grown vegetables. He talked about the superior flavor of seasonal fruits that are picked at their peak ripeness. He also used the term farm to table, which describes the direct path food takes from a local farm to your dinner plate without long-distance shipping. I decided to use this opportunity to practice my speaking skills. I approached a farmer and asked questions like, "How fresh are these carrots?" and When exactly were these tomatoes harvested? We also compared the prices and quality at different stalls, which helped me practice expressions related to value, such as cost-effective, high-quality produce, and getting good value for money. It was a practical and enjoyable way to engage with English in a real-world setting. A particularly memorable experience happened when I visited a small independent art gallery in the city center last week. I was admiring a series of abstract paintings when the artist himself, a man named Julian, came over to chat. He was kind enough to explain his creative process to me. He used words and phrases I had never encountered before. He spoke about the initial stage of concept development, where he sketches out his ideas. He described his various brushstroke techniques, showing me how a thick, bold stroke could convey energy, while a delicate, thin one might suggest fragility. He also talked about choosing a specific color palette to evoke a certain mood or emotion in the viewer. Listening to him so carefully, I gained a new appreciation for how the visual arts have their own highly specialized and wonderfully descriptive vocabulary. We discussed my favorite painting in the collection, and I tried to use some new expressions I was learning. I told him that the colors he used evoked a feeling of nostalgia, and that I admired the dynamic composition of the piece. I even pointed out some subtle shading that I hadn't noticed at first. It was a deeply enriching conversation that blended art appreciation with language learning. One morning, while on my usual jog through the park, I noticed my neighbor, Mrs. Chen, doing some fitness exercises. I decided to join her for a short run, and we naturally started talking about health and fitness. She is very knowledgeable about the topic and explained her routine to me. We discussed the difference between cardio exercises, like running, which are good for your heart, and strength training. She explained the importance of a proper warm-up before exercising and a cool-down period afterward to prevent injuries. She also talked about various stretching techniques. Our conversation was filled with practical phrases like endurance training, which is about improving your stamina over time, the need for muscle recovery after a strenuous workout, and the importance of a good hydration strategy, which simply means drinking enough water. I realize that discussions about sports and fitness can introduce you to very precise and useful vocabulary. These are terms you can use in both casual conversations with friends and in more formal contexts when discussing health and wellness. Later that week, I had a video call with my colleague, Andrew, who works in a different branch. He was explaining a problem he had encountered while preparing a major presentation for a client. He was very clear and professional in his explanation, and I paid close attention to his language. He described the process of data analysis he had undertaken and the challenge of creating an effective visual representation of that data using charts and graphs. He was also concerned about audience engagement, wanting to make sure his presentation was interesting and held everyone's attention. As I listened, I focused on how he structured his sentences. He used excellent connecting words, known as transitions, to make his points flow logically. He would say things like, "First we gathered the data. However, we soon discovered a discrepancy. In addition, we needed to simplify the findings. Consequently, we decided to create a new set of infographics." Conversations like this are an absolutely brilliant way to learn formal and professional English. It's not just about the vocabulary, it's about the structure, the flow, and the clarity of the communication. The next day, Leo and I decided to join a small one-day cooking class that focused on baking bread. The chef, a lively woman named Isabella, explained the whole process with such passion. She used specific terminology that made the science of baking come alive. She talked about kneading the dough properly to develop the gluten. She explained the importance of proofing time, which is the period you let the dough rest and rise. She was also very precise about the oven temperature, explaining how it affects the crust and the crumb of the bread. I made an effort to actively use the vocabulary myself. I would describe the steps back to Leo, saying things like, "Okay, so now we need to gently fold the ingredients together," or "the recipe says to," "let it rise for at least an hour," and finally, "we need to bake it until it's golden brown." It really struck me how an activity as common as cooking can be an incredibly rich source of vocabulary and descriptive language. It turns a daily chore into a fun and interactive language lesson. On a quiet afternoon, I decided to visit my local library to return some books I had finished. I ended up having a wonderful conversation with one of the librarians, a woman named Anna, about our favorite literary genres. She told me she was a huge fan of historical fiction, but also enjoyed a good psychological thriller. She also recommended a few biographies she had recently read. As we talked, we naturally started discussing what makes a book compelling. We touched on the importance of strong plot development, a well-defined character arc, where the main character grows or changes, and a unique narrative style. Talking about books is such a natural way to introduce more sophisticated vocabulary into your conversations. It allows you to express opinions, explain your preferences, and analyze stories in a deeper way. It moves beyond simple descriptions and into the realm of critical thinking, all while practicing your English. A couple of days later, I attended a community meeting held at the town hall. The topic was about local environmental initiatives, something I'm very interested in. I listened to one of the speakers, a man named Mr. Davies, explain several new projects. He talked about improving waste management in our town, expanding our recycling programs, and encouraging more sustainable practices among residents. The discussion was full of important and relevant terms. He spoke about reducing our collective carbon footprint, finding eco-friendly alternatives to single-use plastics, and the need for greater community engagement to make these initiatives successful. Paying close attention during this type of formal presentation is excellent for honing your listening skills. You learn to follow a structured argument, pick out the key points, and understand vocabulary that is becoming increasingly important in our world today. Last weekend, I decided to do something a little different and visited a local farmers cooperative just outside of town. The manager, a friendly man named Mr. Green, was kind enough to give me a tour and explain how they operate. He talked about their mission to support local producers and bring fresh food to the community. He used some business-related terms in a very practical context. For example, he explained their supply chain, which is the entire process of getting a product from the farm to the consumer. He also mentioned product traceability, which means they can track every item back to the specific farm it came from. We also discussed quality standards and how they ensure all their produce is fresh and safe. While listening, I took the opportunity to ask questions about the difference between organic and conventional products. He explained the meaning of certification labels, what it means for crops to be pesticide-free and the importance of seasonal availability. It was absolutely fascinating to see how specialized vocabulary naturally arises in everyday conversations about topics like food and local business. Later on, I met up with my friend Chloe at a nearby coffee shop. She had just gotten back from a business trip to Germany and was full of stories. She explained some of the challenges of traveling internationally for work, including dealing with jet lag, managing tight schedules, and navigating different standards of business etiquette. We had a long discussion about how cultural differences can affect communication. Chloe shared some examples, using phrases like the importance of polite formalities in German business meetings, the preference for scheduled appointments over spontaneous drop-ins, and the value of networking opportunities at professional events. As I listened to her carefully, I really noticed the way she structured her story. She used connecting words and phrases like "first of all," "on the other hand," and "in the end." These small additions made her narrative very clear, professional, and easy to follow. It was a great reminder of how important structure is for effective speaking. One morning, I decided to join Leo for a yoga session at a local studio. The instructor, a calming woman named Maria, guided the class through a series of stretches and breathing exercises. Her instructions were very precise, and I focused on the specific vocabulary she used. She talked about mindful breathing, the practice of paying full attention to your breath. She guided us on how to maintain core strength and improve our flexibility training. I tried to practice the expressions she used in my own mind, repeating phrases like "hold the pose," "engage your muscles," and "release the tension." Discussing the session with Leo afterward gave me a chance to practice describing physical sensations and experiences in English. I used phrases like feeling completely rejuvenated, having a sense of mental clarity, and a greater body awareness. It was a perfect example of how physical activities can provide a rich vocabulary for describing feelings and internal states. The next day, I visited a community center that was offering a free introductory photography class. The instructor, Mr. Peterson, was explaining some fundamental techniques to the group. He showed us how to use the rule of thirds to compose a more visually appealing shot. He explained the concept of depth of field, which relates to how much of the image is in sharp focus. He also demonstrated different lighting adjustments to create mood. I asked him a few questions about camera lenses and equipment, and he patiently explained the difference between a wide-angle lens, which captures a broad view, and a prime lens, which has a fixed focal length. He also stressed the importance of tripod stability for taking sharp, clear photos, especially in low light. I found it so interesting how hobbies and creative pursuits have their own precise terminology. Knowing these terms makes conversations with other enthusiasts much more engaging and accurate. It allows you to share your interest on a deeper level. Later in the week, I was helping my neighbor, Mrs. Robinson, carry some boxes of donations into her house. As we worked, she started telling me about her volunteer work at a local animal shelter. Her passion for the cause was evident in the way she spoke. She used phrases like community service to describe her involvement. She talked about organizing fundraising events to gather money for the shelter's operations. She also spoke about the importance of beneficiary support, which means providing care and resources for the animals. I listened carefully as she described some of her specific projects, such as organizing donation drives for food and blankets, coordinating volunteers for daily tasks, and raising awareness in the community about animal welfare. It was another one of those moments that reminded me that simply listening to people talk about their experiences, even in the most ordinary settings, can be an incredible source for learning advanced vocabulary and observing natural sentence structures. One afternoon, I attended a seminar about sustainable living that was organized by the local library. The speaker, a scientist named Dr. Simmons, discussed practical ways we can all reduce our environmental impact. She talked about improving energy efficiency in our homes, using renewable resources like solar power, and adopting eco-conscious habits in our daily lives. She gave many practical examples, such as installing solar panels on your roof, reducing single-use plastics by carrying reusable bags and bottles, and composting food scraps at home. I took mental notes, paying close attention to the phrases she used for making recommendations and giving advice politely. She would say things like, "You might consider," or "an effective approach is to." She also explained the benefits clearly, using phrases such as, "This not only helps the environment, but also reduces your utility bills." Listening to these kinds of structured, informative talks is excellent for practicing both listening comprehension and the ability to organize your own thoughts and arguments in English. During a walk in my neighborhood park, I struck up a conversation with a man named Peter, who was walking his very energetic dog. We started talking about pets and the responsibilities of animal care. He explained his dog's feeding schedule, the importance of consistent behavioral training, and his regular grooming routines. I used the opportunity to practice asking specific questions like, "What do you typically feed your dog on a daily basis?" And "How do you train it to follow commands so well?" Our conversation naturally included phrases such as obedience training, socialization with other pets, and the necessity of routine checkups at the vet. I realized that conversations about hobbies you're interested in, like pet care, can introduce a wealth of practical vocabulary while keeping the process of learning English fun, natural, and highly relevant to your life. On another day, I had to make a trip to the local hardware store. I was planning a small home repair project and needed to buy some supplies. The store assistant, a helpful man named Mr. Clark, explained the different tools and materials to me. He used specific terms like measuring tape, power drill, and wood varnish. I asked him about the pros and cons of using screws versus nails for my project. We also discussed different sanding techniques and the best way to achieve a smooth surface finishing. It struck me how even everyday tasks like fixing things around the house can involve a surprising amount of specialized vocabulary. Practicing these kinds of conversations helps make your English skills much more practical and relevant to real-life situations you might actually encounter. A few mornings ago, I went to a nearby artisan bakery to pick up a fresh loaf of bread. The baker, a woman named Mrs. Thompson, was explaining the process of making sourdough bread to another customer, and I listened in. She used fascinating phrases like starter culture, which is the live yeast mixture that makes the bread rise. She talked about the long dough fermentation process, which develops the bread's unique flavor. She also emphasized the importance of a precise baking temperature. I asked her a few questions about her techniques, and she described the scoring patterns she cuts into the top of the loaf, the ideal hydration levels, of the dough and the concept of oven spring, which is the final burst of rising that happens when the bread first goes into the hot oven. While listening to her, I noticed how her descriptive language turned a simple explanation into a vivid and memorable learning experience. Discussing the bread with my husband later allowed me to reinforce the vocabulary I had learned, using words like the bread's texture consistency, its golden crust, and its chewy interior. Later that week, I joined a local language exchange event at the library. It was a great opportunity to meet new people. I was paired with a man named Miguel who wanted to practice his English, and I, in turn, was curious to learn a bit of Spanish. He told me about his job as a computer programmer. He explained concepts like coding logic, the process of software debugging to find and fix errors, and algorithm optimization to make programs run more efficiently. Our conversation naturally included phrases like step-by-step analysis, error handling, and achieving performance improvements. Listening to him explain these highly technical concepts in a clear and accessible way showed me how specialized vocabulary can be used effectively without being confusing. It's all about context and clear explanations. One evening, I decided to go for a swim at the community swimming pool. While there, I met a woman named Linda, who was coaching a youth swim team. I watched for a while, and then we started chatting. She explained some of the swimming techniques she was teaching the kids, such as the freestyle stroke, maintaining a proper breathing rhythm, and using a kickboard for exercises. I tried to practice describing the movements I saw, using phrases in my mind like maintaining body alignment, increasing stroke efficiency, and swimming timed laps. Discussing the different swimming routines with her afterward gave me a fantastic opportunity to practice using both action verbs and descriptive adjectives in English in a new context. Another day, I took a trip to a small local museum that focused on the history of our town. The curator, a very knowledgeable man named Mr. White, was giving an informal tour. He explained the exhibits using terms like artifact preservation, which is the process of protecting old objects from decay. He provided the historical context for each display, explaining what was happening in the world at that time. He also talked about the art of exhibit curation, which involves choosing and arranging the items in a way that tells a compelling story. I asked him about the origin of some of the items, and in his answers, I learned expressions such as ancient relics, our town's cultural heritage, and the chronological display of events. Listening to his detailed explanations in this formal setting showed me how advanced language can still be clear and accessible when delivered well. It was a lesson in how to sound intelligent and precise without being overly complicated. A few days later, I volunteered to help at a charity clothing drive that was being held at a community center. I met one of the coordinators, a dynamic young woman named Sophie, who explained the sorting process to the volunteers. She used practical phrases like dividing the clothes into clothing categories such as shirts, pants, and jackets. She showed us how to do a quality assessment to make sure the clothes were in good condition. Then she explained the donation allocation, which was the process of deciding which local shelters would receive the sorted clothes. While helping out, I found myself actively practicing expressions like folding neatly, checking for wear and tear, and organizing by size. Volunteering in this way was not just a good deed, it was also a very practical language lesson. It showed me how performing structured tasks and talking about them can naturally improve your vocabulary and listening skills in a very hands-on way. The following morning, I attended a cooking demonstration at the same community center. The chef, Mr. Harris, was showing a group how to prepare traditional pastries. He described the kneading techniques for the dough, the necessary proofing durations, and the exact oven temperatures for a perfect bake. I tried to follow along closely, repeating his key phrases in my mind. Gently incorporate the ingredients. Let the dough rest until it is doubled in size. Check for a golden brown crust. Discussing the process with the person next to me afterward helped to reinforce this advanced and very descriptive vocabulary, making it more likely that I would remember and use it in the future. That afternoon, I visited a small electronics shop because I needed to buy a new pair of headphones. The sales assistant, a young man named Ben, was very helpful. He explained the features of different models using terms like noise cancellation, frequency response, and battery life. I asked him some follow-up questions about wireless connectivity, sound clarity, and the overall durability of the headphones. I find that conversations about technology are a great way to learn precise, practical vocabulary that is becoming more and more relevant in both our daily lives and in many professional settings. During a casual walk last weekend, I ran into my neighbor, Mr. Ahmed, who was diligently working in his garden. He explained some of his gardening techniques, like how he prunes his shrubs to keep them healthy, his specific watering schedule during the hot summer months, and the importance of soil aeration. I asked him about the different fertilizer types he uses, the sunlight requirements for his various plants, and his methods for pest management. I've found that talking about plants and nature provides such a rich source of descriptive language for actions, processes, and natural observations. This kind of conversation is absolutely ideal for improving both listening comprehension and speaking fluency in a relaxed and enjoyable way. Later that week, Leo talked me into joining him at a local knitting workshop. I'm not very crafty, but I decided to give it a try. The instructor, a patient woman named Emma, explained the basic techniques. She showed us how to cast on stitches to begin a project. She explained the importance of pattern reading and how to follow the charts. She also taught us how to weave in the edges to create a clean, finished look. I practiced describing the process out loud, using phrases like, "You have to loop the yarn carefully around the needle. It's important to maintain a consistent tension, and you need to follow the pattern chart exactly." I've learned that trying new hobbies in an English-speaking environment is a fantastic way to improve both listening and speaking skills naturally, simply by following detailed examples and instructions. It forces you to listen carefully and use the language to accomplish a task. A few mornings later, I went back to that artisan bakery, but this time it was for a class on how to make croissants. The baker, Mrs. Lewis, explained the complex process of lamination, which involves folding layers of dough and butter together. She described the folding techniques, the importance of butter incorporation, and the need to chill the dough between folds. I repeated the key steps mentally and discussed the phrases with the person I was working with. We talked about how you have to chill the dough thoroughly, how the goal is to create airy layers, and how you bake until golden and flaky. Listening to such detailed, step-by-step instructions is an excellent way to improve your vocabulary comprehension and your ability to follow complex sequences in English.